Bismillah Rahman Rahim. Assalamu alaikum, my dear students. In the current session, I am going to talk about the grammar of Old English. Well, the grammar of any language is significantly important in the study of that language. And when it comes to the English language, it is really important for the students of the history of English language to understand what were the developments in the grammar of English language through centuries. I hope that by the end of this session, you will be able to understand not only the grammar of Old English, but also how it was distinct and different from the modern English grammar. When we talk of the Old English syntax, the main feature or the distinctive feature that I would like to talk about is the syntactic style that was used and that showed the semantic and syntactic relationships with a lot of variety. If you notice the syntax of Old English, you would find a high proportion of long sentences with subordinations are used. For example, in the prose of Edward Gibbon or Henry James, or in the poetry of John Milton. And I'm sure you are familiar with the name of Milton. By the way, this kind of style of writing is called hypotactic style. We can compare this hypotactic style where a lot of subordinate clauses are used with the main clause and a long sentence is formed. We can compare this hypotactic style with the other style that we call paratactic. Paratactic style is a style in which shorter sentences are used with a higher proportion of principal clause. So the main clause is longer and has less in number and smaller in size the other clauses, the subordinate clauses. In the language that is used by Ernest Hemingway in his novels, you would find that style. Old English syntax had a particular feature that was with relation to its inflectional system. Old English actually provided a far greater flexibility and a far bigger choice and freedom of word order than modern English. Now notice how it worked. Look at this Old English. I'm going to show you how Old English worked. Look at this text that is taken from Old English. This, in the parenthesis, in the bracket, I have given the translation. The king held a great council. If you notice the structure, which word follows which word, what is the syntax, what is the grammatical arrangement. Notice another possibility of the same idea in Old English, this one. And here I have given the translation. If you look at the translation is, a great council held the king. Now, I want you to notice these two structures, please. This particular structure, this one, and this one. Because they are given in modern English, they would be easier for you to understand. Compare these two, please. What you would notice is, the king held a great council. This structure is still used in modern English. This is all right in modern English, but this structure is not used in modern English. A great council held the king. Until and unless it is poetry or an unusual grammatical structure in an unusual situation, otherwise this is not approved in modern English. But when we think of Old English, it was flexible enough and it gave freedom to use both of these structures. However, my dear students, it does not mean that Old English did not have any rules regarding grammar and syntax. Of course, it had rules and of course, it had preferences as well with reference to word order. So, Old English favored three particular types of word order for the clauses, and here I have given those three types. The one is subject, verb, object, what we call SVO. The other is VSO, that is verb, subject, object. The third is subject, object, verb. So these were the three preferred styles, again which show a lot of freedom as compared to the modern English structures. Well, my dear students, here on the slide you can see a full example of a text that is taken from Old English, and it is divided into, if you could notice, 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5 parts to show you the grammar and the relationship of the clauses with each other. Literally, it is difficult for us to understand this, notice the choices. It is difficult for us to read all this. So I will just show you the translation, and again I would discuss the features of each of these 5 clauses one by one. It contains 5 clauses. The first one is, when I then this all remembered. Second is, then remembered I also. Third is, how I saw. Fourth, before it all ravaged was and burnt up. 5. How the churches throughout all England stood with triers and books filled. Now what I want you to notice is, it was the feature of Old English that, it gave the abundance of repetitions. When I then this all remembered. Once this is said, in the second clause there is a repetition. Then remembered I also. How I saw. Before it all ravaged was and burnt up. So, one feature is the repetition that you notice. The other features I would show you here. The first clause was, when I then this all remembered. If you notice this clause, this is a subordinate clause because it is starting with when. It has a subject, object, verb structure. One of the 3 preferences that I have already shown to you. In the second clause, then remembered I also. This is the example of the second type of preference that we can see. The third clause, how I saw, it shows the third option, SVO, subject, verb and object order used. In the fourth clause, again, what you can notice is that this is a subordinate clause because it starts with before. And the verb is in the subjunctive and is placed after the past participle, ravaged. So look at the variety that Old English offers. And finally, the fifth clause, how the churches throughout all England stood with triers and books filled. This is a subject-verb order, but the verb is, notice, it is intransitive because there is no direct object. Transitive verbs are those where there is a direct object. Intransitive verbs, by the way, are those where there is no direct object. So, I hope through this example of 5 clauses from the same sentence, you can see how with a lot of freedom and with a lot of flexibility, Old English provided the use of various structures in its syntax.